When my sister announced that our parents told her she could live with me, I nearly choked on my drink. For a few seconds, I just sat there frozen, smiling through my shock, pretending everything was fine. While my heart started to pound like a drum inside my chest. She had no idea what I'd done just a week earlier. No idea that the house she was so excited to move into didn't even belong to me anymore. My parents were watching me, waiting for my reaction, completely unaware that the secret I was carrying could tear everything apart. I wanted to tell her the truth, that I'd sold the house, that I'd done it not out of greed, but out of desperation, that I'd been trying to fix something quietly, to save our family before it all fell apart. But as I looked into her bright, hopeful eyes, I couldn't speak. I could feel the walls closing in around me, the weight of every lie, every choice I'd made pressing down on my chest. And in that moment, I realized some truths don't destroy people because of what they reveal. They destroy people because of when they come out. And this truth, my truth, was about to ruin everything. The Dinner Begins the restaurant was the kind of place people went to pretend their lives were better than they really were. Soft jazz murmured from hidden speakers, and the faint scent of rosemary and butter hung in the air. Candlelight shimmered across polished cutlery, flickering just enough to make shadows dance along the walls. My parents sat across from me, my mother in her usual pearl earrings, posture straight as ever, and my father already halfway through his second glass of wine. Everything looked perfect on the surface, but perfection, I'd learned, was often the best disguise for disaster. Even before the waiter brought the bread, I felt the tension, a quiet hum beneath the laughter, like a string pulled too tight. Something was coming. I just didn't know from where Emma sat beside me, smiling too brightly, stirring her drink with a straw as if she needed something to do with her hands. She dressed up, floral dress, hair curled just so, the picture of innocent joy. But I knew that look. I'd seen it before every time she wanted something. Mom kept glancing her way, giving small, deliberate nods. Dad, oblivious, was telling a story from work, his booming laughter echoing above the gentle music. I kept my eyes on the wine in front of me, swirling it slowly, pretending to be calm while my heartbeat counted every second. I didn't know what Emma was planning, but I knew it wasn't going to end well. My family had a way of turning celebrations into confrontations. They just disguised them with cake and smiles. And tonight felt like the calm before the storm. Then, between Dad's laughter and Mom's approving smile, Emma leaned forward. Her voice was light, too light. "So," she said, eyes glimmering with mischief, "Mom and Dad said I can move in with you." The words hit me harder than the wine ever could. For a second, the room seemed to fall silent. The clinking of cutlery faded, the chatter blurred, and all I could hear was the echo of her sentence replaying in my head. I looked at her, still smiling, still proud, and then at Mom, who avoided my gaze like she already knew what I was thinking. They had no idea that just a week ago I'd sold the house she was talking about. And now, as I stared into Emma's expectant eyes, I realized I was sitting at a table built on a lie I hadn't yet confessed. The dinner had just begun, but the night was already ruined. The announcement, "Mom and Dad promised I could live with you." Emma's voice rang with excitement, innocent, naive, and completely unaware of the bomb she had just dropped. My fork froze mid-air, a piece of roasted chicken trembling on its edge before falling back onto the plate. For a moment, I genuinely thought I'd misheard her. But when I looked up, the truth was written across every face. Mom's smile was wide and satisfied, the kind she wore when she thought she'd done something wonderful. Dad gave a small, approving nod, his way of saying decision made. Meanwhile, Emma sat there grinning, glowing with gratitude, her eyes already picturing the move-in day that would never come. And me? I felt my stomach twist, my pulse hammering against my ribs like a warning. The restaurant's background noise, the chatter, the soft piano, the clinking of glasses seemed to fade. The only sound I could hear was my heartbeat, steady but frantic, echoing in my ears. I looked from Emma to Mom, then to Dad, searching for some hint that this was a joke. "Live with me?" I finally managed, the words barely above a whisper. Mom nodded, pleased, completely unaware of the storm forming behind my polite smile. Yes, dear. You've got that big house all to yourself now, don't you? That single sentence hit me like a stone dropped into still water, the impact spreading in ripples through my chest, up my throat, into my mind. That house? The one I'd sold just a week ago. A secret I planned to reveal carefully. Privately, not here. Not like this. And now, with all eyes on me, there was no escaping it. I took a slow sip of water, my hand trembling slightly as the glass touched my lips. Every instinct told me to stay quiet, to nod, smile, and deal with it later. But something inside me rebelled. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe I was simply done pretending that every family lie was love. I set the glass down gently, the sound sharp against the polished table. About that house, I began, forcing the words through my tightening throat. Mom's smile faltered just a little. Emma blinked, still oblivious, still smiling. I felt the room tilt slightly, candlelight flickering across their faces, shadows sharpening like cuts. I sold it, I said finally. The words came out flat, honest, final. And for the first time, all night, no one spoke. The silence was heavier than any storm I'd ever heard. And I knew from the look in my mother's eyes that dinner was over, even if the food was still on the table. The bombshell, that's awkward. I began, my voice thinner than I intended. Because I sold the house last Friday. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Just the soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint clatter of dishes from another table. Then the entire room seemed to exhale, a slow, collective release of disbelief. Emma's smile froze in place, her lips twitching as if caught between laughter and horror. My father's hand stopped mid-reach, the fork dangling uselessly over his plate. And my mother's wine glass trembled slightly before touching the table with a faint clink, red liquid rippling inside like blood stirred by wind. The silence that followed was heavy, tangible, like the pause before an explosion. Emma tilted her head, confusion twisting into panic. You're joking, right? She whispered, her voice barely steady. I shook my head once, slow, deliberate, certain. No, it's gone. The papers were signed last week. The words hung between us, cold and solid, impossible to take back. My mother's lips parted as her eyes darted across my face, searching for some sign that this was a cruel prank. You sold the family house? She breathed, her tone breaking somewhere between accusation and heartbreak. I nodded, my throat dry. It's not ours anymore. And in that instant, I felt the shift. The invisible thread that bound us as a family began to pull. Fray and unravel. It felt like confessing a crime. My heart thudded violently against my ribs, every beat echoing in the quiet that now filled the table. Their eyes burned into me, questions, confusion, betrayal, all colliding in a storm of unspoken anger. The restaurant chatter faded until all I could hear was the low hum of my own guilt. Emma's hands trembled as she placed her napkin down, her knuckles pale. Why would you do that? She finally asked, her voice breaking. I wanted to explain about the sleepless nights, the bills, the loneliness that had hollowed me out in that big, empty house. But the words tangled in my throat. Because how do you tell your family that saving yourself sometimes means breaking their hearts? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. And in that moment, I realized selling the house wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of a war I hadn't meant to start. The shock mom's face drained of color, her expression shifting from disbelief to fury in a single breath. Without telling anyone? She hissed, her voice trembling but loud enough for nearby diners to turn their heads. I felt my stomach drop. It wasn't planned, I managed to say. I had to act fast. The words sounded weak even to my own ears, like an excuse I didn't believe. Emma's chair scraped loudly against the floor as she stood, eyes wide and trembling. Had to? You had to sell our childhood home? She shouted, her voice cracking under the weight of betrayal. Every conversation in the restaurant seemed to die at once. The air thickened, heavy with tension. The smell of food, the warmth of the candles, Even the music. Everything suddenly felt wrong, tainted by the moment. I could feel heat rising behind my ears, the sting of humiliation mixing with guilt. I knew this confrontation was coming. I'd played it out in my head 100 times. But not like this. Not surrounded by strangers whose eyes flickered with pity and curiosity, pretending not to watch. Dad sat perfectly still, his fork resting untouched beside his plate, his eyes fixed on the flickering candlelight instead of me. He looked detached, almost weary, like someone who'd seen this ending long before it arrived. Mom's hands shook as she reached for her glass, the wine trembling inside. "You had no right," she whispered sharply, her voice breaking halfway through the sentence. "That house was our history. Your father's work. My life's memories. You had no right." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that I had every right to save myself, but my throat refused to open. The candlelight flickered violently, throwing shadows across their faces, sharp, distorted, angry. I wanted to explain everything. The calls from the bank, the sleepless nights, the fear that the house would swallow me whole just like it did them. But all I could do was stare at the tablecloth, tracing invisible lines with my fingertips. "It wasn't your decision to make," Emma said through clenched teeth, her voice low and trembling. Her eyes were wet, her jaw tight. She looked less like my sister and more like a stranger wearing her face. I wanted to shout back, "It wasn't yours either." But the words caught behind my guilt, strangled before they reached my lips. The tension sat between us like smoke, thick and choking. And in that painful, echoing silence, I realized something cruel. It wasn't just the house that was gone. It was us. The secret reason asterisk, the truth was uglier than any of them could imagine. I hadn't sold the house out of greed or convenience. I'd done it to bury a secret, one that had been eating me alive for months. Dad's gambling had gone further than any of us knew. The late-night phone calls, the sudden disappearances, the missing cash, I'd pieced it all together too late. When two men in dark coats showed up at my door, their words weren't threats. They were promises. They knew where we lived, where Mom shopped, even where Emma worked. Dad had begged me, voice shaking, eyes wet. "Please don't tell your mother." "I'll fix it. I just need time." And like a fool, I believed him. I kept his secret and paid the price for it. The night I signed the sale papers, my hands wouldn't stop trembling. The realtor smiled politely, not knowing that every pen stroke felt like a betrayal. That house wasn't just a building. It was birthdays, Christmas mornings, laughter echoing down hallways. And now it was gone, sold to strangers who didn't know its history or its ghosts. I remember staring at the sold sign outside the gate, feeling my chest tighten until I could barely breathe. It didn't feel like saving Dad. It felt like erasing us. But back then, when I looked at the fear in his eyes, I told myself I was protecting the family. I told myself it was love. Now, under the restaurant lights, that lie tasted bitter on my tongue dotted the table. All three of them were staring, waiting for me to speak, to justify what I'd done. Mom's lips were tight, her knuckles white around her fork. Emma's eyes glistened with unshed tears. And Dad couldn't even look at me. His gaze was fixed on the flickering candle, as if its flame might burn away his guilt. I wanted to scream the truth, tell them it was you. Tell them what you did. But when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. I saw the weight of shame already crushing him. And for a moment, I pitied him more than I hated him. So I stayed silent. My silence became my confession and my punishment. Mom's faith in me shattered. Emma's trust dissolved into something colder. And in that single suffocating moment, I realized I had protected the one person who never deserved it. The confrontation, Emma's voice cut through my thoughts like shattered glass. "So what now?" she demanded, her tone trembling between anger and disbelief. "You just walk away? Start over? Pretend none of us ever mattered?" Her words hit harder than I expected. I tried to steady my voice. "It wasn't like that," I said, barely above a whisper. "Then what was it like?" She pressed, her jaw tight, her tears catching the candlelight, tiny, fragile sparks that reflected all the years we'd shared. I wanted to tell her everything, the phone calls, the threats, the nights I sat awake wondering how to keep our family safe, but every explanation felt like it would only make the wound deeper. Across the table, Mom's lips quivered, but she said nothing. The only sound was the faint clinking of dishes from nearby tables. As if the world outside our storm kept moving on without a stop, Mom finally spoke, her voice unsteady but sharp enough to draw blood. "You should have talked to us," she said. "Families don't make decisions like this in secret." The irony twisted inside me. Secrets were the reason I did it. His secrets. The ones she refused to see and I'd been forced to carry. "Talk to you?" I said quietly. "How, Mom?" "Every time I tried, you told me I was overreacting." Her hand trembled as she reached for her glass, pretending not to hear the truth in my words. The rim of the cup clinked softly against her teeth before she set it down again. Emma crossed her arms tightly, trying to hold herself together. "You've changed," she whispered. "You used to care." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "I still care," I said. "That's why I did it." Then I turned to Dad. He hadn't spoken a single word since Emma's outburst, just sat there, motionless, like a man carved from guilt. "Say something," I whispered. It came out desperate, almost begging. He shifted slightly, eyes locked on his untouched plate, as if the truth were buried somewhere in the food he refused to eat. The man I had risked everything to protect wouldn't even meet my eyes. The air between us grew heavy, not with anger, but with something far worse. Disappointment. Mom's hand rested on his arm. Still not understanding what he'd done, what I'd sacrificed to keep his shame hidden. I looked at all three of them and realized the awful truth. I had saved the family name, the peace, the illusion, but in doing so, I had lost the people behind it. And there, under the soft flicker of candlelight, I finally understood. Sometimes silence doesn't protect you. It buries you. The father's truth, the air around us seemed to thicken. Then, finally, Dad spoke. "I told her to do it," he said. 5 quiet words, yet they struck like thunder. The clatter of silverware, the hum of background chatter, even the faint music playing overhead, all of it blurred into silence. Mom blinked, as if the sound hadn't fully registered. "What did you just say?" He didn't look up. His hands trembled slightly, fingers tracing the rim of his glass. "It wasn't her choice," he said again, softer this time. "It was mine." The table went still. My chest tightened. The truth, after all these months, was no longer my burden alone, and yet it didn't feel like relief. It felt like collapse. Emma's jaw dropped, disbelief written across her face. "You knew?" she whispered. "You let her take the blame?" Dad's shoulders sagged, his voice barely more than a murmur. "It was for the best," he muttered. "For who?" Mom's voice cracked through the air, sharper than I'd ever heard it. Her hand trembled as she reached for her napkin, dabbing at tears that wouldn't stop falling. "For you? For your pride?" His silence was the answer. I looked at him, the man I once saw as indestructible, and saw only a stranger drowning in his own guilt. "You let me carry this," I said quietly, my throat tightening. "You let them hate me." He swallowed hard but said nothing. The silence between us screamed louder than any argument ever could. Mom covered her mouth, shaking her head as if refusing to believe what she was hearing. "All this time." "I blamed her," she whispered. "And you just sat there?" The weight of her words landed heavy. For a moment, I thought she might collapse. The restaurant felt colder now, emptier. Even the candles seemed to burn lower, as if ashamed to witness what was unfolding. Emma turned to Dad, tears streaking down her face. "You destroyed everything," she said, her voice trembling. "And you made her clean up your mess." He opened his mouth as if to respond, then closed it again. No defense. No apology. Just regret. I could feel every pair of eyes around the room shifting toward us, strangers sensing a storm they couldn't see but could feel. For months, I had been painted as the traitor, the one who sold out the family, who acted selfishly. Now, with one confession, Dad had rewritten the story. But too late. Mom's voice broke into a sob. "You didn't just lose the house," she whispered. "You lost us?" And as the candlelight flickered across our shattered reflections and the wine glasses, I realized some truths don't set you free. They only show you how trapped you've always been. The fallout mom's chair scraped harshly against the tiled floor, the sound cutting through the thick, suffocating quiet. "I can't do this," she whispered, her voice trembling but full of finality. Her fingers shook as she pushed herself to stand, the napkin falling from her lap like a white flag on a battlefield. Dad's hand reached out instinctively, desperate, trembling, but she stepped back as if his touch burned. "After everything we built?" she said softly, though her tone carried the weight of years. Love, sacrifice, disappointment. The sentence broke midway, collapsing under its own pain. The faint hum of the restaurant faded behind a fog of tension. Even the waiter, frozen mid-step, sensed the fracture in our table. I sat still, barely breathing, watching my mother, the woman who once held our family together, come apart in front of me. Emma's gaze flickered between us, eyes glistening with disbelief. Her lips quivered before her voice found its shape, trembling, wounded. "So this is it? This is who we are now?" No one answered. There was nothing left to say. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. The air was thick with shame, and the faint aroma of roasted garlic and wine felt sickening. Dad leaned forward, his voice low and hoarse. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way." Mom cut him off with a whisper so sharp it could have drawn blood. "You meant every lie you told?" The candles flickered between us, shadows stretching long and thin across the table, as though the light itself was trying to escape. In that fragile silence, I realized something bitter. Truth doesn't mend a family. It exposes where it was already broken. Emma stood abruptly, her chair toppling behind her. Her purse clutched tight, her voice trembled between fury and heartbreak. "You both disgust me," she spat, each word slicing the air. "You lied to all of us." Her tears shimmered under the dim candlelight, streaking down like traces of melted glass. She didn't wait for an answer. She turned and stormed toward the door. The sharp echo of her heels against the marble floor was the only sound left, fading, until even that was swallowed by the restaurant's silence. Mom stared at her untouched meal, lips pressed tightly together, her shoulders shaking as she tried not to cry. Dad looked older, smaller, as if the truth had stripped years off his strength. And I just sat there feeling the emptiness settle around us. No one moved. No one spoke. The candles still burned, but the warmth in that room had long gone out. The aftermath, the silence that followed, was deafening. Mom sat back down, staring blankly at her glass. Dad rubbed his forehead, muttering apologies that no one wanted to hear. I felt hollow. The weight of what I'd done and what I hadn't said pressed down like a physical burden. When the check came, no one reached for it. The waiter hesitated, eyes flickering nervously between us. I pulled out my card, trying to act normal. My hands trembled as I signed the slip. Dad's reflection in the window looked older, smaller, defeated. I almost didn't recognize him anymore. As we left the restaurant, the cool night air hit my face like punishment. Mom didn't say goodbye. Dad muttered, "We'll talk later." I nodded, knowing we wouldn't. The damage was already done. The family I thought I was protecting had splintered into something unrecognizable. The call part 1. The ringing silence rain still traced thin silver lines down my window, whispering against the glass like it was trying to speak. My phone vibrated on the table once, twice, then again. The name Emma glowed on the screen, sharp and cold in the dim light. For a moment, I just stared at it. My chest tightened with dread. Answering meant reopening a wound that hadn't even started to heal. But letting it ring felt cruel, Another silence piled on top of too many already. Finally, I swiped the screen and lifted it to my ear. "Hey," I breathed, barely a whisper. On the other end, there was nothing, just the faint sound of static and the soft, uneven rhythm of her breathing. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but trembling. "You could have told me." No accusation. No shouting. Just a sentence heavy enough to crush me. I pressed my forehead against the cool window pane, watching raindrops slide down. "I thought I was protecting everyone," I said. The words sounded weak even as I said them. "Protecting us from what?" she asked. Her tone cracked in the middle, halfway between disbelief and heartbreak. I closed my eyes. From the truth. There was a long pause, so long I thought she might have hung up. Then I heard it, the faintest sob, muffled but real. "You think secrets protect people," she said finally, "but they only protect pain." Each word landed like glass shattering somewhere inside me. I wanted to say something, anything, to make it right. But my throat refused. Every explanation sounded too small for the damage I caused. "Emma," I started, but before I could finish, there was a click. The line went dead. The sudden silence was unbearable. The faint hum of the fridge, the ticking clock, the whisper of rain, everything seemed too loud, too present. I stared at my reflection in the dark phone screen, eyes swollen, face pale, a stranger staring back. That's when it hit me. Maybe the house hadn't been haunted by memories at all. Maybe it was us, our lies, our guilt, our endless pretending. And no matter how far I sold or ran, some ghosts always find their way back home. The aftershock days passed in a blur, quiet, colorless days where time seemed to hesitate between what was lost and what still lingered. The house keys sat motionless on my counter, small and cold, yet unbearably heavy, as if every ounce of regret I'd ever felt had been forged into their metal. They were more than just keys now. They were relics of a life I could no longer unlock. The buyers would move in soon, strangers, new laughter, new stories. A new beginning built on top of the ashes of ours. I told myself I wouldn't go back, that I'd already said my goodbyes. But memories have a way of calling you home. Not kindly, but insistently, whispering through every quiet hour. So one final time I returned. The air inside was colder than I remembered, emptier too, as though even the house had stopped breathing the moment we left. The walls, once covered with framed photos and childhood drawings, now stood bare and expressionless, pale ghosts of what they once held. My footsteps echoed through the hollow rooms, each sound bouncing off the emptiness like an accusation dot in the hallway. I stopped beside the old wooden doorway, the one we used to mark with our heights every year. The faint pencil lines were still there, faded but stubborn, stretching upward like fragments of forgotten dreams. I traced my fingers over them, feeling the roughness of the wood beneath the smooth paint. For a moment, I could almost hear our laughter again. Emma giggling as Dad held the ruler, Mom pretending to scold us for growing up too fast. But when I blinked, the sound was gone, and all that remained was silence. That silence, it wasn't peaceful. It was thick, suffocating, alive. It clung to the air like dust, settling into every corner, every crack in the floorboards. The house felt like a grave of echoes, each room holding a different ghost. I stepped into the living room and sank to the floor, my back against the wall, surrounded by the faint smell of dust, old wood and drying paint. The sunlight from the window fell in uneven streaks across the floorboards, illuminating motes that danced lazily in the air, like tiny fragments of time refusing to settle. I sat there for a long while, letting the memories wash over me, Dad's soft humming as he tinkered with the broken radio, Mom's voice floating from the kitchen as she sang along to a song only she could remember, Emma's laughter echoing through the hallway on our birthdays. I could see it all. Candles flickering on the cake, the warmth of the old lamp by the sofa, the soft hum of a family that once believed love was enough to hold everything together. But now, the warmth was gone. The hum was gone. and in its place, only silence remained, the kind that doesn't fade, only thickens with time. A silence heavy enough to break you. I stood slowly, my hand resting on the wall as if I could steady myself against the weight of what I was leaving behind. My throat tightened, the words clawing their way up before I could stop them. "I'm sorry." I whispered Dot it wasn't for the house. It was for the people who once filled it, for Mom, who had carried too much, for Dad, who had lost more than he could say, for Emma, who had every right to hate me, and for myself, for all the things I couldn't change. The apology hung in the air like smoke, vanishing as soon as it was spoken. I slipped the keys into the mailbox, a small, final gesture of surrender, and stood there for a moment longer, looking at the door that had opened to every chapter of my childhood. Then, with a deep breath that tasted of dust and endings, I turned away. I didn't look back, because I knew if I did, I might never find the strength to leave again. The new owners a week later, the house no longer stood in silence. The stillness that once wrapped it like a shroud had been replaced by sound, bright, unfiltered, alive. Laughter spilled from the open windows, echoing down the street like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. For the first time in years, the house was breathing again. I parked my car across the street, engine idling softly, and just watched. A moving truck stood by the curb, its back doors wide open, boxes stacked high with colorful toys, framed photos, and signs of a life just beginning. A young couple stepped out, the kind that still believed in forever. The woman carried a basket of fresh flowers. The man balanced a box labeled Kitchen Fragile. Their children darted around the yard, chasing a golden retriever who barked joyfully, tail wagging like a metronome to their laughter. On the porch sat a garden gnome small, smiling, a silent sentinel welcoming this new chapter. The sight made my chest tighten. It was everything we once were: hope, noise, togetherness. Everything we had lost without realizing when it had slipped through our fingers. I leaned back in my seat, watching the father turn on the hose while his daughter squealed and ran through the spray. Her laughter floated through the air, pure and untainted, wrapping itself around the old walls that had once held my own childhood. I found myself smiling, though the ache in my heart was sharp and deep. Dot in that moment. I realized something: the house was never cursed, never haunted by its past. We were, our secrets, our silence, our pride, those were the ghosts that had poisoned it. The house had simply waited, patiently, for new voices to fill its emptiness. It didn't need us anymore. And maybe, just maybe, that was a kind of mercy. The sold sign that had stood in the front yard for weeks was finally taken down. I watched as the new owner drove its post from the soil and carried it away. It was such a simple act, ordinary, almost meaningless to anyone else, yet to me it felt final. Like watching the closing of a book you'd spent your whole life reading. The sun dipped lower, painting the windows gold. The house looked warm again, not like a relic of what once was, but a home, alive, loved, and loud. I sat there for a long while, my fingers tracing the steering wheel, not ready to leave, not quite able to stay. My reflection in the car window looked older than I remembered. Tired, yes, but lighter somehow. Letting go, I realized, doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't erase the pain or rewrite the past. It just means surviving it and learning to live with the echo instead of the noise. I turned the key, the car engine humming to life. As I drove away, I glanced one last time in the rearview mirror. The house grew smaller, its outline softened by the distance, until it disappeared behind the trees. I didn't cry, not because I didn't feel anything, but because I had already cried everything I could. All that remained was the hollow quiet that follows after the storm. And somewhere deep down, beneath the sorrow and the stillness, there was a flicker, small but stubborn, of hope. Hope that maybe Emma would call again. Hope that maybe the pieces we had shattered could still be gathered, not to rebuild what was lost, but to begin something new. The letter, it was a quiet morning, one of those gray, slow-moving dawns where the world feels half awake and half lost in thought. The mailman's footsteps echoed faintly down the hall, followed by the soft thud of envelopes slipping through the slot. I didn't expect anything, bills, flyers, maybe another reminder that life keeps going, even when you don't. But then I saw it. An envelope, plain, unmarked, no return address. The kind of thing that instantly feels heavier than it should. My fingers hesitated before picking it up, as though some part of me already knew who it was from dot inside was a single folded sheet of paper. The handwriting stopped me cold. I know it anywhere, the careful loops of her letters, the slight tilt to the right. Emma. My breath caught as I began to read. I understand now. Maybe we all needed to lose the house to find the truth. It was short. Just 2 sentences. But they landed harder than any speech ever could. At the bottom, in faint, smudged ink, her name, Emma. For a long moment, I just sat there holding the paper like it might dissolve if I breathed too hard. The room felt smaller, quieter, like the world had paused, waiting for me to process what those words meant. Then, something else slipped out from the envelope. A photograph. Old and fragile, its edges soft and worn from time. It was us. The 4 of us standing on the porch of the old house, sunlight spilling over everything. Mom holding a glass of lemonade, laughing at something Dad had said. Emma with her hair in uneven pigtails, missing a front tooth, her smile wide and bright. And me, younger, lighter, unburdened. Smiling without secrets. The colors had faded, the image slightly bent, but it still felt alive, like a heartbeat trapped in paper. I ran my thumb along the edge of the photo, feeling the small crack where it had once been folded. She hadn't forgiven me completely. I knew that. Her words weren't forgiveness. They were understanding, or maybe something even rarer, acceptance. And in a way, that meant more. She didn't excuse what happened. She simply saw it for what it was, a tangled mess of love, fear, and mistakes. For days, then weeks, the letter stayed on my desk. I couldn't bring myself to file it away or throw it out. It sat there beside my lamp, catching the light in the afternoons, reminding me of everything that had been lost and everything that still might be found. Sometimes, when the house got too quiet, I'd pick it up again. Read her words slowly. Maybe we all needed to lose the house to find the truth. I thought about what truth really meant. Maybe it wasn't about blame or apology. Maybe it was about seeing one another without the armor of expectation, about understanding that family doesn't fall apart because it's weak, but because it's human. And being human means breaking and trying again. The photo and the letter became my compass, a reminder that silence doesn't always mean distance, and that love can survive even after the walls come down. And every time I looked at that faded picture, I whispered to myself, not in guilt anymore, but in quiet hope, maybe someday we'll rebuild too. The reunion months passed like the turning pages of a book I wasn't sure I wanted to finish. Life had settled into a quiet rhythm, work, sleep, silence. The phone stayed still. No new calls, no new apologies. Just time moving steadily forward, dragging me with it whether I was ready or not. Then one morning, an unexpected message appeared. Coffee? Just the 2 of us. No name. But I didn't need one. The cafe she chose was small and quiet, tucked between a bookstore and an antique shop, neutral ground. As if she'd chosen a place where neither of us could hide behind the ghosts of our past. The smell of roasted beans and cinnamon hung in the air as I pushed open the door, my pulse quickening at the sound of the bell. She was already there, Emma, sitting by the window, her fingers wrapped around a steaming cup, sunlight brushing across her face. For a moment, I just stood and watched, not the angry sister from that dinner table, not the stranger who'd hung up in silence, but the girl I'd once shared secrets and midnights with. When she finally looked up and smiled, it was small, hesitant, but real. Still surviving? She asked, her voice softer than I remembered. Barely, I said with a half smile. It wasn't a joke, not really, but she laughed anyway. A nervous, familiar laugh that cracked the ice between us. We talked. For hours, it seemed. About small things first: work, weather, the city's never-ending traffic. Then, slowly, like peeling back old wallpaper, the conversation shifted. We spoke of Dad's slow recovery, of Mom's silence softening into phone calls, of the way grief doesn't vanish. It just finds a quieter corner to live in. At one point, she stirred her coffee, staring into the swirl of cream and shadow. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to hate you for what you did." I didn't interrupt. "But now? I get it. You were trying to fix something that was already broken. You did what you thought was right." Her eyes glistened as she looked up. "Even if it hurt." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I just wish right didn't feel so wrong," I said. My voice trembled slightly, betraying the calm I was trying to hold on to. She reached across the table, hesitated, then placed her hand over mine, a small, wordless bridge between two people who had been standing on opposite sides for far too long. Outside, the world kept moving, people passing, cars honking, the day fading into amber light. But inside that cafe, time seemed to pause. For the first time in months, I felt like maybe we hadn't lost everything. Maybe we only lost our way. When we finally stood to leave, the air between us had changed. She smiled again, not perfectly, not fully, but enough. "Don't disappear again," she said. "I won't," I promised. The hug that followed wasn't cinematic. It wasn't the kind that solves everything or erases years of hurt. It was fragile, trembling, careful, human. But it was real. And for us, that was enough. As she walked away, her coat catching the late afternoon wind, I realized forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's 1,000 small ones, shared silences, half smiles, awkward laughter, each one a quiet step toward peace. The past hadn't disappeared. It never would. But for the first time, it didn't feel like a chain. It felt like a story we could finally close together and maybe someday begin again. That night, I found myself driving down the same winding road I'd taken countless times before, the one that led to the house that had once been ours. The moon hung low, pale and watchful, casting silver threads of light across the quiet neighborhood. As I approached, the familiar shape of the old house came into view. Glowing softly beneath the street lamps, the porch light was on. Curtains fluttered faintly in the windows. Inside, silhouettes moved, laughter, voices, the clinking of dishes, a new family filling the space we had left behind. For a moment, I sat there in the car, engine idling, the hum blending with the faint sounds of life spilling from the house. It didn't hurt like I thought it would. Instead, there was a calmness, bittersweet, but strangely comforting. That house had carried our joy, our anger, our secrets. It had listened to every argument, held every apology. It had been our witness, our shelter, and eventually our undoing. And now it belonged to someone else, a family beginning their story where ours had ended. I rolled down the window, letting the night air wash over me. It was cool and clean, carrying the faint scent of rain and cut grass. I closed my eyes and listened. The echoes of old laughter seemed to drift through time, blending with the new voices inside. For the first time in years, I didn't feel haunted by those memories. I felt released. A thought settled quietly in my mind, as gentle as the breeze. Families aren't built on blood or promises. They're built on forgiveness, the kind that doesn't forget, that chooses to understand. We had broken, yes. But in that breaking, we had learned what it meant to truly see one another, flawed, frightened, and still trying. The house had done its job. It had held our memories long enough for us to be ready to let them go. I started the car again, headlights slicing through the dark. The reflection of the house shrinking slowly in my rearview mirror until it became just another warm glow among many. Still, I couldn't bring myself to drive too fast. Some goodbyes deserved to be slow. As the wind whispered through the open window, I said it out loud, softly, almost to myself. Goodbye. Home. The words floated into the night, disappearing into the hum of the engine and the rhythm of the tires against the road. The streetlights blurred into streaks of gold across the windshield. like fading stars marking the end of a constellation dot in my mind. The image lingered, the house standing tall beneath the moon, its windows glowing gently against the dark, a beacon of what was and what could be. The camera pans upward, the roof, the trees, the night sky. A final shimmer of light over the windows, over the porch where laughter still echoes, and then fade to black.